A very good morning to all the dignitaries and participants for today's national webinar being jointly organized by Rajkumar Gullamani Kanya Mahavidyalaya and Prerna College of Commerce, Nagpur on borders, migration and pandemic. Honorable Vice Chancellor Dr. Muralidhar Chandrakji, on account of online addressing engagement, could not make it to our webinar. Now, we have among us respected management members of both the colleges, Dr. S.C. Dhane, Secretary, Prerna Seva Mandal, and Mr. Vijay Kumar Kivalamani, Sindhu Navya Mandal Nagpur. Keynote speaker, Dr. Gamini Fonseca, and chairperson for the session, Dr. Steve Kumar Sharma. I welcome them all. I request Dr. Praveen Joshi, Director, Prerna College of Commerce, to deliver welcome note for today's program.
Good morning, everybody. It's a great reason and opportunity given by COVID-19 that through webinars, all of us are coming together for a very noble cause, that is to give due deliberations to the pandemic and how can we utilize this opportunity for more and more deliberations. I welcome Dr. Gamini Fonseca, Dr. Sayandi, Dr. Neeru Tandon, Dr. Asha Chobe, Dr. Sushil Kumar Sharma, the Secretary of Prerna Seva Mandal, Dr. S.C. Gullamani, and Secretary Navayog Sindhi Mandal, Professor D. Kevalamani, and all other dignitaries and participants. I welcome you all to this webinar. I am sure that the situation that COVID-19 has caused across the world is really very dangerous, and it has caused depression, mental disorders, sleeplessness, and many other psychotic problems to thousands and thousands of people. We see the snow that's in America, that's in Italy, that's in Spain, and many other countries. People are dying in thousands and thousands. So it has given rise to a kind of psychosis, a kind of fear in the mind of almost everybody as to what would be the future of mankind in the years to come. With the announcement from the WHO, World Health Organization, that we have to live with COVID-19 for many more years to come, as there is no solution in sight in the near future. So we'll have to develop certain habits as to how to cope with the situation. We may have to change our lifestyle so that we remain safe. Since literature is an integral part of our life, the course of literature will change. And all these issues that have taken place, that have emerged because of COVID-19, will find expression in literature as well. Here we are all together to see what can be the consequences of COVID-19 on literature. I welcome you all and hope that this webinar will immensely benefit all of you with very learned and eminent authors available with us. So once again, I welcome you all and thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Dr. Urmila Devi, Principal Rajkumar Kevalamani Kanya Mahavidyalaya, to give introductory remarks.
A very good morning to all of you. I welcome you all to this webinar. Literature is a reflection of life. Whatever happens in life finds its reflection in literature. It has been rightly said that literature transcends all man-made barriers and reaches every nook and corner of the world. Literature has always demonstrated that good literature stands taller than the petty considerations like religion, caste, creed, language, regionalism, and politics. Every religious scriptures of different religions disseminate the message that universal appeal. It has an universal appeal and aim at the welfare of the entire humanity as one. Literature dissolves all kinds of religious, political, geographical, communal, lingual, or regional boundaries and borders, and endeavors to weave the whole of the humanity into a single fabric. When borders get dissolved, the words like migration, immigration, and emigration, the ideas based on geographical considerations, sumo moto, lose their meaning and prompts the whole humanity to become one. The recent pandemic has taught us 2 months that we are all one. In spite of different national boundaries, different religions, and lot many things that cause divisions of mankind. COVID-19 has made us realize that it does not discriminate, it does not make any distinction on any man-made demarcation. Now the fight with corona is not the concern of one single race or nation. It is the fight of the entire human race against the virus that is likely to change the course of our life. The prevalent conditions of living caused by the virus in this world may bring us emotionally together, and there will be a retake on issues like borders and migration that will find expression in literature in the years to come. In the light of these issues, the topic of today's webinar finds its justification. I conclude with the lines of the entitled Imagine, composed by John Lennon. Imagine there are no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say, I'm a dreamer, but I'm the only one. I hope someday you will join us and the world will be as one. I hope that instead of dividing the world, let us see an opportunity in this condition to come together and fight the enemy of mankind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Now I request Dr. S.C. Gulani ji, Secretary Prerna, Seva Mandal Nagpur, to express his best wishes for the success of the webinar.
आज के वेबिनार के प्रमुख वक्ता डॉक्टर गामिनी फेंसुका, डॉक्टर सायन डे, डॉक्टर सुशील कुमार शर्मा, डॉक्टर निर्मल टंडन, डॉक्टर आशा चौबे एवं श्री विजय कुमार केवलरामानी जी तथा केवलरामानी कॉलेज के प्राचार्य उर्मिला डबीर मैडम, प्रेरणा कॉलेज के डायरेक्टर प्रवीण जोशी, प्रेरणा कॉलेज ऑफ कॉमर्स एवं राजा राजकुमार केवलरामानी महाविद्यालय के द्वारा आयोजित इस एक दिवसीय अंतर्राष्ट्रीय वेबिनार में मैं सबका स्वागत करता हूं। कोरोना के कारण जो परिस्थिति निर्माण हुई, इन परिस्थितियों में हमें हमारा फ्यूचर, भविष्यकालीन लाइफ कोरोना के साथ कैसा जीना है और उसी के साथ पढ़ाई भी कैसी करना है, इसका विभिन्न पहलू साथ सामने आने वाले हैं विभिन्न वक्ता के बोलने के द्वारा। मैं एससी गुलाने घोषित करता हूं कि आज के वेबिनार का उद्घाटन मेरे द्वारा हो चुका है।
Thank you so much, sir. Now I request Mr. Vijay Kumar Kevalramani ji, Secretary Sindhu Navayuva Mandal Nagpur, to say a few words on this occasion.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am very much happy that Prerna College of Commerce and our college Rajkumar Keval Ramani Kanya Mahavidyalaya have jointly organized a webinar. Today, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have the change the means of communication, and the technology has helped us doing it. With the progress in technology, we have been able to organize a seminar like this. We are also making use of the technology to conduct all line classes and meeting with the students and members of the staff. Our institution has always organized conferences and seminars, but this is a different one. Prerna College of Commerce has always collaborated with us in academic activities. I wish the webinar a great success.
Thank you, sir. Today we have among us Dr. Gamini Fonseca, Senior Professor, Department of English and Linguistics, Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, University of Ruhuna, as a keynote speaker. Currently, he is the coordinator of BA degree program at Department of English and Linguistics at the University of Ruhuna, Sri Lanka. He has cultivated his professional skills as a university teacher and researcher in the teaching of English language and literature. He has proven expertise as a teacher, educator, lecturer, textbook writer, critic of literature and culture. He has achieved his professional experience by working at the Professional In-Service English Teacher Training Program from Oman Ministry of Education. He has an illustrious local and international research and publication record with about 30 books, 60 research papers to his credit. He has delivered lectures at international conferences, workshops, symposia in Sri Lanka, Thailand, Finland, and Sweden. A prolific writer, Dr. Fonseca is engaged in research in literary theory, linguistic philosophy, and cultural studies. I request Dr. Fonseca to enlighten the gathering with his scholarly words.
Namaste. Can you all hear me? Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First, I express my pleasure over the privilege of being with you at this one-day international webinar on borders, migration, and pandemic, organized by the Department of English at the Rajkumar Keval Ramani Kanya Mahavidyal Linguistic Minority Institution, Nagpur, India. I also convey my sincere gratitude and respect to the organizing committee for the honor of being invited to hold the keynote address at this prestigious gathering. My thanks are due to the organizing committee patrons, Professor Vijay Keval Ramani, President Sindhu Navyavuk Mandal, Dr. S.C. Gulane, Secretary Prerna Seva Mandal, Dr. Urmila Dabir, Principal and Head Department of English, Rajkumar Keval Ramani Kanya Mahavidyal, Dr. Praveen Josh, Director, Prerna College of Commerce, Dr. Madhavi Moharil, Department of English, Rajkumar Keval Ramani Kanya Mahavidyal, Mrs. Senal, Mrs. Nihal Rakunde, Department of English, Prerna College of Commerce. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you all from the bottom of my heart. On Saturday, the 9th of May, around 10 o'clock in the morning, I thought exactly a week ago, I received a call from Dr. Praveen Joe, while attending an online departmental meeting from home with my staff at Department of English and Linguistics at the University of Rome. During a 2-minute telephone conversation, Dr. Praveen extended this valuable invitation to me, and in a mighty hurry to get back to my colleagues, I asked him to communicate with me by email and promised to send him my email address. A chill went down my spine while I was reading through his message along with the brochure of the webinar. On reading it only, I realized the gravity of the responsibility it entails. How come I prepare a keynote address so suddenly on a theme which had not been on my mind so long? The theme of the webinar is borders, migration, and pandemic. The only possible theme for me is migration in literature. To be honest, I am not an expert in the currently growing body of diaspora literature that you have a session on in this webinar. Then I wrote back, dear Dr. Praveen, I went through the brochure and your request and felt how I would collaborate with you on May 16th. The time is too short to organize myself as I have to read through and finish 10 BA dissertations in English by May 15th. I know the difficulty of retaining reputed academics for a function like this in an emergency. However, I'll give a try, but please don't expect me to do something very ambitious. It must be obvious to you that I accepted the honor simply in a sense of cooperation. As I mentioned there in my reply, my respectable colleagues from India and elsewhere, please don't take any shortcomings in my speech as a matter of taking for granted your academic stature as serious scholars. With apologies in advance, I am now proceeding to my keynote address. My topic is on humanitarian crisis while in migration. I was somewhat inspired by a few lines from your brochure. The impetus is so strong that distant lands attract more, but an innate urge to return predominates, paving way for a homecoming during humanitarian crisis. Circumstances put humanity above all, because in all supposed matters, life is the essence of being. Subtle but unforeseen events keep the land borders sealed or unsealed for non-residents to the territory, which ironically the resident humans call their own. These lines reveal how narrow-minded we are as a species, while being so unimmune and unresistant to the numerous phenomena detrimental to our existence. The Cambridge Dictionary provides some definitions of the term migration in accordance with its usage in Britain and in the US. Accordingly, the Brits use migration to call the process of animals traveling to a different place, usually when the season changes, or the process of people traveling to a new place to live, usually in large numbers. And the Americans use it to call movement from one region to another and often back. According to the season of the change. The process of a person or people traveling to a new place or country, usually in order to find work and live there temporarily or permanently. The intra-country and inter-country migration people make under various circumstances reveal the fact that hardly an author remains confined to his or her domestic setting within his or her native township, and that most authors have drawn inspiration for their writing during their migration. Today, Research methodology has come to a stage where, in the absence of factual evidence provided by public documents and historical records, are accepted creative writings of all genres such as novels, short stories, poems, and plays that represent with evidence the realities of the contemporary situation. Accordingly, Shakespeare could be quoted comfortably to establish an argument related to the European Renaissance, or Kalidasa could be quoted to establish an argument related to the rule of Chandragupta II. Thus, fiction is not treated as total imagination in today's discipline of research. So, as literary scholars, we enjoy a special privilege in using the substance of our discipline in academic discourse for the sake of argumentation. In that light, we can admit that creative writers who migrated to other countries for long or short periods of time have really contributed to ensure justice for the common people there. A classic example to establish this claim is in chapter 25 of the English author E.M. Forster's A Passage to India, where he relates the Indian Dr. Aziz's English accuser, Adela Quester's behavior before the court proceedings. "I'll thank you this evening. I'm all to pieces now," said the girl, forming each syllable carefully as if her trouble would diminish if it were accurately defined. She was afraid of reticence in case something that she herself did not perceive took shape beneath it, and she had rehearsed with Mr. McBride in an odd, mincing way her terrible adventure in the cave. How the man had never actually touched her but dragged her about, and so on. Her aim this morning was to announce meticulously that the strain was appalling and she would probably break down under Amrit Rao's cross-examination and disgrace her friend. "My echo has come back again badly," he told him. Adela Quester's sense of insecurity before going to the courtroom to face Dr. Aziz's defense lawyer, the anti-British attorney Amrit Rao, challenges the Eurocentric claims arrogantly made by former British Secretary at both Thomas Babington Macaulay, who said in his minutes of the 2nd of February 1835, quote, "A single shelf of a good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. And it is, I believe, no exaggeration to say that all the historical information which has been collected from all the books written in the Sanskrit language is less valuable than what may be found in the most paltry abridgments used at preparatory schools in England. The cynical attitudes towards the former British colonies, so established by colonial chiefs such as Macaulay, within the British community were refuted by writers in migration such as Forster, who endeavored to enlighten the same British community that India is no cheap place and the people there cannot be so easily fooled. An anti-colonial campaign rose in Britain later, thanks to such writers who are international citizens, not restricted to any territorial boundary. In this spirit, let me recite a poem by a leading national poet of Sri Lanka, the Reverend Buddhist monk Tibet S. Mahinda Thera. "Ratata maru anaya taraye vadinu daka, nivata gatiyenma biyavi duwana eka, ruwata siti mauge yauwana gatiya maka, kumata baravu nida polavata noinda nika." His motherland is being nailed to death. The coward is running away in fear. Having ruined this youthful mother's good looks, why on earth to this world he was born? Poems penned by Reverend Tibet S. Mahinda are celebrated to this day as freedom songs in the island nation of Sri Lanka. Sri Lankan historians are unanimous in endorsing these verses as having infused the Sri Lankan freedom struggle of the late 1930s through to the 1940s with the courage, strength, impetus required by the movement to inspire nationalism among the people and wrest freedom from the British colonial rule. But Reverend Minder was not a Sri Lankan by birth. He was of Sikkim extract, a young lad who left home in the Himalayas when he was 12 and achieved iconic status in a country beyond India's southernmost tip. While Foster and Mahinder realized the plight of the communities of their respective host countries without their basic right to justice and used their pens to resuscitate their identity and independence as respectable humans. There are many other writers who enrich themselves as well as others by the experiences they achieved as migrants in territories far away from home. In August 1867, shortly after Russian author Fyodor Dostoevsky married the stenographer Anna Snitkina, the couple visited the Basel Museum in Switzerland, and Dostoevsky was excited by Hans Holbein's Dead Christ. Mrs. Dostoevsky wrote later, the whole form of Christ is emaciated, the ribs and bones plain to see, hands and feet riddled with wounds, all blue and swollen like a corpse on the point of decomposition. The face too is fearfully agonized, the eyes half open still, but with no expression in them and giving no idea of seeing. Nose, mouth, chin are all blue. The whole thing bears such a strong resemblance to a real dead body. Theodore, nonetheless, was completely carried away by it, and in his desire to look at it closer, got onto a chair so that I was in a terrible state lest he should have to pay a fine, like one is always liable to hear. Dostoevsky's exposure to the painting influenced his craftsmanship in his famous novel, The Idiot, where he enacts the rigorous and ruthless crash testing of his Christian convictions against the existing social reality, through the amazing levels of simplicity maintained by the protagonist, Prince Mishkin. Now I move on to the American writer Ernest Hemingway's most inspiring works on war, for whom the bell tells, and A Farewell to Arms. A year after the Civil War broke up in 1936, the American author Ernest Hemingway left for Spain to cover the conflict for the American Newspaper Alliance. During his coverage of the war, he traveled with a fellow reporter named Martha Gellon. The two had first met in Key West and became close during their time in Spain. The novel is set near Segovia, Spain in 1937 and tells the story of American teacher Robert Jordan, who has joined the anti-fascist loyalist army. In the same way, during World War One, Hemingway worked as an ambulance driver for the American Red Cross. Like Henry, he served on the Italian front and suffered a severe injury on the Austro-Italian front. Hemingway was ultimately taken to a Red Cross hospital in Milan, where he met and fell in love with a nurse named Agnes von Kurowski. In September 1918, about 2 months after Hemingway's injury, von Kurowski volunteered for service in Florence during an influenza outbreak. The plot of A Farewell to Arms is fairly straightforward. While working with the Italian ambulance service, Henry meets the English nurse Catherine Barclay. Although she still mourns the death of her fiancé, who was killed in the war, Catherine encourages Henry's advances. After Henry is badly wounded by a trench mortar shell near the Sonso River in Italy, he is brought to a hospital in Milan, where he is eventually joined by Catherine. He sends to him and as he recovers. During this time, the relationship deepens. Henry admits that he has fallen in love with her. Thus, we find migrant authors expressing their pulse on the people moving in different ways under numerous circumstances in a world of uncertainty. As migrant Indian authors, I have worked on somewhat seriously on Salman Rushdie, Jhumpa Lahiri, Anita Desai, and several others, and have found that they keep their identity in their writings by setting scenes for readers to reflect on Indian sensibility. Well, even authors such as Charles Dickens, B.H. Lawrence, Karen Dixon, Bernard Shaw, Bertolt Brecht, George Orwell benefited their migration in becoming creative in such a way that their works attracted the universal appeal. So, my dear colleagues, it is not all that is possible to reflect on migration in the literary career. I apologize for not being exhaustive in my short presentation, and I'm sure you will realize the part played by migration in the craftsmanship of the authors in question. I hope you will understand what we can achieve making use of this short span of time. So, I wish you all the very best in a tricky time that we are all somewhat confined to our domains in an atmosphere where this corona is causing troubles as seen by the chair of the webinar. Thank you for the privilege extended to me for being with you and good luck to everybody. Namaste.
Thank you very much. I think it's my turn now to give my remarks. Hello.
Yeah.
I think it's my turn now to give my remarks. First of all, I feel sorry.
For your scholarly address, I request Honorable Chairperson of this session, Dr. Sushil Kumar Sharma, Professor, Head Department of English, University of Allahabad, to sum up the session with his observations.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I congratulate Dr. Praveen Joshi and his team for giving me this opportunity and for bringing us all together and making best use of our time during this COVID-19. I feel sorry because there is no electricity connection in my house right now because of the dust storm last evening. So I'm using my mobile phone light. हेलो हाँ मैं बोल रहा हूँ
Hear you. We hear you.
सुनाई दे रहा है am I audible?
Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yeah. You are.
So kindly do not disturb me, okay? There was a telephone call from your office. Anyway, so Professor Fanesca started his deliberations on migration from humanitarian crisis. Then he moved on to Macaulay. Then he moved on to Mahendra Dev, a Sri Lankan poet. Then he moved on in 1930s and 40s. Moved on to British writers and American writers, particularly Hemingway. And then last of all, we talked about some of the Indian authors who are settled abroad and how the humanitarian concern finds its projection in their works. It was quite a long journey, covering almost 150 years of migration, beginning from Macaulay down to Salman Rushdie. Anyway, Migration may cause so many good things. Migration may also change the shape of the world. Hmm? For example, I read a quotation from Birdwood, and Birdwood says regarding the discovery of India, the discovery of India profoundly agitated the hearts and minds of the people of Europe. The rude multitude were stirred by the uncontrollable lust of riches and a spirit of adventure, and the cultivated by the sense of renewed faith and hope in the divine deliverance of the world at the moment when Christendom was almost sinking into the old despair of human destiny and duty and marked the decline of imperial Rome. For all men, the sphere of human intelligence and sympathy was permanently and definitely enlarged. The Spanish and the Portuguese discovered the Indies were, for Europe indeed, nothing less than the revelation of a new moral world and the definite emancipation of the human soul from the ghostly trammels of the obsequies bondage to secular and religious dogmatism through the dark centuries of the Middle Ages. And when these new routes to India particularly were discovered, and in those days Sri Lanka used to be a part of India. We were not considered to be separate nations. So a large amount of information from Europe was exchanged, which caused a lot of mutual benefit and also a loss of trust, and created a situation where a large amount of money was taken from this subcontinent to Europe. The Europe suddenly became the eyesore of the world, and they started exploring the world. And the vast amount of say this vast amount of ruthlessness that was practiced in America, in Australia, of course, in Indian subcontinent also, is just a matter of record. No doubt, in the process, we might have gained certain things, but we were also a loser. What happened to thousands of tribes that were there in America? All those tribes were ruthlessly butchered by all these migrant people. All that migration, forced migration that was taking place from Africa in the form of slavery. What happened to all those people? And their families were destroyed, and a permanent loss to their psyche and their psychic living was caused by all these people. And so much so that even today, that enmity between these two persons, these two races continues. I have written a poem, because you refer to some Sri Lankan poets also. Therefore, I think I should refer to some of the poems that I have written recently on this issue. There is a poem called The Destitute. To hide my brown color, this is what racism does. This is what racism does. To hide my brown color, I dress in white apron, color my hair silver, use a borrowed tongue, spend my holidays in the States. The mind is washed away from beneath my feet. I lose my motherland to an alien, my business to the exotic. My morals are kept as a pawn in lieu of a job that gives me my bread, or in lieu of a few doses of medicines that turn me a slave forever, or in lieu of education that belittles my parents. You were referring to Macaulay. So Macaulay's agenda of educating people and making us cultured. So in lieu of education that belittles my parents, the language no more expresses myself. The strings are becoming tighter. The apron is no more soothing. The air seems to choke me to death. I have to kill myself for regeneration. So a permanent damage has been done to the psyche by all this forced migrants. And what about these black people? Just see the experience of all these people, these slaves. Even before I could make out your mien, I started moving towards you. You were a black patch in the white territory. Your tongue was red. It spitted only abuses and hurled curses on the short and plump bully trader who called himself a follower of Jesus and thought himself to be an angel of mercy. Where was the God of justice when he slyly pushed my son away and killed him? When I spoke Kingwana and you Mande, could we talk? Was any communication possible except about the wounds and agonies? Yes, we could pray to Jesus about our welfare, and he prayed for more profit to the same Lord. So different purposes, different perspectives emerge from these migration studies. Regarding COVID, as said by Dr. Praveen Joshi, I'm very happy to see that he's saying that how to exist with COVID, that is the problem. Most of the webinarians these days, they are talking about the fact that how will they make a time in the what will be the shape of the world in the post-COVID world. Now that post-COVID world could be the same, provided we are able to have the kind of medicines that are required to fight it. But if that medicine is not there, and suppose that vaccine is not created in another 20 years, so are we going to stay like this forever, or are we going to learn to stay with COVID and do some work, some routine work, and communicate our concerns to each other?
Yeah.
That is the best thing, right? With these remarks, I thank you, Dr. Praveen Joshi, once again, and I congratulate Dr. Foniska for enlightening us and the fellow participants. And
Dr. Sushil,
sir,
I admit 100% of what you said. Now,
sir,
the thing is now, most of these colonizers, they have been in a campaign to dehumanize
sir.
Can you hear?
Yes, please go on. Please go on. Please go on.
These colonizers, actually, they dehumanized the natives of the colonies, the so-called colonies.
Sir.
And I experienced it when I was in Europe. Now we Asians have been introduced to different other colonies. I mean, in America, in Africa, and all those places, as a subhuman category, not down to human levels, And actually, was sort of same picture of them had been shown to us, So we were actually kept in compartments to the advantage of the colonizers. So later on, few people like Mahatma Gandhi had the guts to overcome this and fight back, and that is how actually the enlightened British people themselves got the idea that they are doing a kind of injustice to these communities. So
no, I beg to differ there, sir, because so far no reparations have come from England. The Queen so far has not apologized. The Parliament of England so far has not apologized for all those things that were perpetrated on us. Right? So to call them civilized,
Yeah.
and to say that they are sorry for whatever they have done to us,
Oh, yes.
right? They are not sorry. They feel that this was simply a game that
But
they
you,
were playing.
but you know, the simple people, like people who came here, soldiers or finding work, they had come in such a way that they had become helpless and they had gone back sometimes, with arms and legs and all sort of amputated or destroyed, and they had gone back as handicaps, in the battles.
No, no, you see,
People,
we are confusing between two issues. Hmm?
yes, 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 yes.
All those soldiers that who had come here, they were simply the part
Yeah, yeah,
of
yeah.
the imperial design,
Oh, yes.
right?
Yeah. So thank you very much.
So even if,
And this dialogue, of course, we must keep. I mean, this webinar is only a starting point for us. So,
sir,
so we will be in touch, and I'm very, very appreciative of your ideas contributed to the forum. Especially in relation to the points that I made. Thank you.
thank you so much, thank you so much. Over to you, Dr. Praveen Joshi, or the compere. Hello. Are there some questions?
Yes, yeah.
Are there some questions from the participants?
I express a sense of gratitude. Keynote addressee Dr. Gamini Fonseca for his resourceful address. I express my gratitude to Dr. Sushil Kumar Sharma for chairing the keynote session. In spite of the constraints of recording, Dr. Sharma has managed to address us with the help of light from his mobile. Thank you so much, sir, for your overcoming the problem and addressing us. Thank you to the respected president of both the colleges for their encouragement. Deeply felt thankfulness to Dr. Praveen Joshi and Dr. Uda Dabir for their constant motivation and support. Now I hand over the proceedings to Dr. Suchita Marathe to conduct the next session.
Dr. Suchita Marathe, on behalf of the organizers, welcome you all to the first plenary session of this international webinar on the theme Borders, Migration and Pandemic. We have had a wonderful inaugural session, and this plenary session promises us more food for thought as we have the opportunity to listen to highly acclaimed academicians. Dr. Prantik Banerjee, sir, Associate Professor in English at Islip College, and Dr. Neeru Tandon, Madam, Professor and Head, Department of English, VSDD College, Kanpur. I welcome you both, sir and madam. Let me begin with a formal introduction of a resource person, Dr. Prantik Banerjee. He has a panorama of achievements to his credit, right from a successful teacher to a wonderful administrator. Naturally, therefore, his area of interest range from culture studies, film theory, post-colonial studies to higher education policies and quality assurance frameworks. His deep insights into quality assurance frameworks have no doubt helped Hislop College in the past to not only initiate innovative activities, but also convert them into best practices. He has been invited to renowned forums for sharing his expertise. He has been a keynote speaker and resource person at several international and national conferences. His learned researches have been published in the form of one book, several book chapters, and research papers. He's a member of Board of Studies RTM Nagpur University and also a PhD supervisor. Apart from this, Dr. Prantik Banerjee, sir, even has the keys to all our problems regarding NAC and RUSA, as he has served as a NAC expert and a RUSA trainer too. Inspiring in these comparatively arid zones, it is indeed a pleasant surprise to learn about the creative dimension of his personality. He's a published poet and short story writer, and his creative ventures are not just restricted to pursuing a hobby. His poems are featured in Sahitya Akademi's India Literature, Pen, and many more. To crown all these creative achievements, he was featured as Poet of the Fortnight in Feb by none other than Kamala Das. As a teacher, he has always impressed his students with his wealth of vocabulary and distinct accent. He has a unique skill of phrasing catchy theme statements. The title of his talk today is apt proof of it. Today, he will be delivering his lecture or session on the theme Migrant Microbes, Traveling Bodies, and Border Immunities, the narrative of pandemics. And now, before curiosity reaches a crescendo, I request Dr. Prantik Banerjee, sir, to deliver his session. Over to Dr. Prantik Banerjee, sir.
Thank you so much, Sucheta. Am I audible?
Yes, very much.
Okay. A very good morning to everyone. And first of all, let me express my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Praveen Joshi and Dr. Urmila Dabir, Director and Principal of two very good colleges here in Nagpur. I also convey I greet the chairperson, Dr. Neeru Tandon, who is going to chair my session. Hello, ma'am. One of the topic of my talk, as Sucheta introduced, is migrant microbes, traveling bodies, and border immunities. And I'm going to specifically look at the narrative of pandemics. But before that, yesterday I was addressing a webinar on the impact of crisis on literature, art, and language. And it's been a season of webinars now. And just to quickly think about, before we go on and engage with the grand narratives or the meta narratives of migration and traveling bodies, and of course the pandemic, one of the biggest indicators of how the present pandemic crisis has impacted on our lives is to basically see some of the changes, some of the immediate changes that it has brought about in our daily lives. I mean, look at the webinar itself. Look at the manner in which we all have, in our interface with technology. The webinar has made it possible for members and delegates to come from across India, not just India, but even cross borders. But at the same time, the webinar also has exposed us, or rather has revealed some of the fault lines that technology, the best of technology, can even impede on human transactions. And that is, I was listening to, or rather, I was watching Dr. Sushil Sharma, the chairperson of the keynote address. And it seems to me, that that's a very good example of what I was reading during these lockdown days by a sociologist named John Nesbitt. And he talked in social trends, he talks about how every time technology brings about a change, or rather a radical change in the revolution in our social realities, he says that huge technological changes can only be engaged with, can only be involved with, when high tech is connected with human touch, or rather high touch. And ironically, again, to talk about touch in the times of pandemic seems to be almost an anathema. It almost seems to be like a taboo. Having said that, friends, first of all, again, I wish to congratulate the webinar organizers on choosing a topic which is very relevant very appropriate. And when I say a topic which is very appropriate and very relevant, not just in terms of abstract discussions and theoretical formulations, but it's a topic which perhaps we are witnessing daily on our roads, on our streets, on our highways, and even so cross-border migration and interstate exoduses have become the living reality of our daily lives. And a webinar such as this becomes an occasion for us to engage, to reflect, and to critique some of the things that are happening around us, where our future itself looks so uncertain and so unpredictable. Friends, who would have thought it would be Hamlet, like no other literary character, who probably would best sum up our COVID condition? The famous line when he said, "The time is out of joint." But then who else but Shakespeare would give his tragic hero a line such as this? Because after all, the bard wrote many of his own plays during the time of pandemics, during the time of not one, but two bubonic plagues. And some of these plays we already know as King Lear, Macbeth, and Antony and Cleopatra. Truly, the ongoing pandemic crisis has become a life-altering event. Just think about again, the way in which the webinar started and how we actually in real time prepared ourselves for our virtual screen presences. It seems to me one of the paradoxes of this technological change that is shaping our daily lives, that suddenly internet protocols have become as important as program protocols, and bandwidths have become as crucial as human bondings. We all are experiencing this pandemic crisis as if it has caused a paradigm shift in the way we think about literature, the way we think about culture, the way we think about our life itself. And the COVID-19 crisis is already being labeled and named as the most defining moment of the millennium by literary and cultural theorists. Some of their writings are already available online, particularly cultural theorists. I've been following the writings of two major cultural theorists, Judith Butler and Slavoj Zizek, and in their writings about the pandemic, about the ongoing outbreak and its crisis, both of them have responded to the crisis. And I would like to bring briefly your attention to some of the points that they were making. Judith Butler connects in her article published in the New York Times. She connects the present pandemic to her theory of human condition. I mean, in a book written 4 or 5 years back called Precarity and Precariousness, Butler today connects her book on human precarity and human precariousness with the ongoing pandemic crisis. Slavoj Zizek, on the other hand, treats the disease not just as a medical, social, and economic malaise, but as an intellectual malaise, from which he says we can only be rescued by what he calls a philosophical and social revolution. Friends, if you ask me what has the COVID pandemic done, well, the COVID pandemic has created what I call a culture of pandemonium. It has created a culture of pandemonium. And a culture of pandemonium, by the word a culture of pandemonium, I mean a culture which brings in chaotic change and disorder in the shape of a cataclysmic event. The nature of this cataclysmic event, of course, is very important. It's not just any event or any incident, but something that alters life. It's a life-altering event in the form of, for example, man-made or natural disaster, or an epidemic catastrophe such as the ongoing pandemic crisis. I mean, look at how the corona pandemic is threatening to break our society. The very foundations, it has already shaken the very foundations of our society. Thousands of people dying a struggling medical support system, a crumbling economy, and a disintegrating social order. Some experts have suggested that we are experiencing not one but two disasters. There is the virus, and then there is the collapse of our social, fiscal, and economic systems due to the lockdown. To me, it appears that there is a third disaster being engendered by the pandemic, and that is of border sealing, racial profiling, xenophobia, and migrant suffering. The slide also shows, new geographies of disease, but I'll relate it to my topic in a few minutes from now. Most of the commentators, as I've been saying, have been speaking about the global disaster as a worldwide medical crisis, as a health emergency, or as a pandemic catastrophe. Obviously, I mean, these nomenclatures, these naming of the crisis does indicate that there is a crisis which threatens to decimate people, to bankrupt economies, and to dehumanize or derail our daily lives. True as this may be, there is more to the pandemic, according to me, than meets the eye. First of all, I'll give you two indications. One, and these are all speculative in nature. These are all my personal, these are just conjectures. So first of all, the first marker that a first marker of the paradigm shift that it has brought about, the pandemic has brought about in our social reality, is that it has made us acutely aware of how border controls, sanitation regimes, and quarantine measures are actually enmeshed both in the outbreak or the pathways of the disease as well as the processes of globalization. The second marker of the pandemic epidemic or the pandemic crisis is that while the contagion of course has, no doubt, it has a medical origin, but it clearly has unleashed, in the past 3 months, it has clearly unleashed a set of disturbing cultural parameters that has already creating immense fault lines in our social structures. Like I said, racial, for example, it has spiked the racial and communal profiling of patients. Second, take a look at the new geography, and this is what I mean, new geographies. Look at the way in which the pandemic crisis has mapped out a new topography. Right in the month of March, when we were following the news of the worldwide spread of this contagion, how we would be glued to our TV sets or our eyes locked onto newspapers, and the way in which world map was being shown, dotted with reds across. And we have already started following the statistics, the daily count of the number of pandemic positive patients and the number of deaths, almost as if a few months back we would be following a cricket score. Look at the way in which the new geographies that are being shaped by the COVID crisis have already created in our own cities, in our own neighborhoods, color-coded zones, red, orange, and green, or how zones have been now are being called containment zones or hotspot zones. There has also been, what we are witnessing also is a renewed or an increased and amplified border vigilance. How borders and securities and border checks are being reinforced and strengthened, and how, again, paradoxically, in an age where globalization and communication technologies and flights connecting anywhere to everywhere, how our movements and our routes that we had taken for granted, ROUTS, the routes that we had taken for granted, are now being systematically controlled, checked, and monitored. Friends, in my talk today, I will try and look at how these larger issues that I try to briefly enumerate, how these find expression in popular culture. Uh, Popular culture is an immediate indicator, a cultural indicator of a present crisis that brings radical changes in our society, in our human interactions. And therefore, it is to popular culture, including media, for example, which becomes an immediate signifier of the changes that a crisis brings upon human society. What holds my interest in examining these circuits of popular culture is not the storyline, not simply the storyline or the characters in what I call pandemic narratives, and I will be defining what I mean by a pandemic narrative very shortly. I'm also reading films as a text, as a multimedia text, of course. But what I'm more interested, more than stories and characterizations, what I'm more interested in examining the way in which the present crisis was and is being reflected in popular culture, especially in films, for example, and bestsellers, techno thrillers, medical thrillers, science fiction, written especially in the last 40 years. What I'm more interested in is to try and identify the underlying tropes that define the pandemic narrative and how they are connected with some of the issues, some of the complex issues that the ongoing crisis has foregrounded. My premise, the premise of my whole talk is that the pandemic narrative, the pandemic narratives show or describe sites of outbreak or sites of contagion, not just as breeding grounds of transmission of pathogens, but also as contact zones of racial and cultural politics. So what is a pandemic narrative? A pandemic narrative is a narrative in fiction and film that repeats particular characters, images, and storylines to produce a formulaic narrative. A pandemic narrative, therefore, often makes use of certain rhetorical strategies and formal devices. Most significantly, pandemic narratives make mythical use of um, they make mythical use of referential codes rather than pro-heretic codes. I'm referring to, of course, Roland Barthes' 5 codes, the systemic typology, the systemic classification of the type of codes that he uses in order to analyze myths. So going back to Barth's distinction between a referential code and a pro-heretic code by which he analyzes any culture as a sign system, pro-heretic codes, as we all know, as defined by Barth, simply refers to plot actions, the sequence of events that make the plot, the action of the plot. On the other hand, according to Barth, referential codes are those codes that link the text to its context. So I'm more interested in looking at the narrative of the pandemic in terms of what Barth calls the referential codes. And the referential codes they locate a text to its context. And by context, I mean, for example, the way in which science, for example, in the context of the pandemic crisis, the way in which science, medical history, and culture has produced a particular text. My purpose in investigating and analyzing the current crisis in terms of a pandemic narrative in films and fiction is that I will try and demonstrate how these pandemic narratives constitute the meta-narrative of popular culture on pandemic itself. Like I said, pandemic narratives make repeated use of a particular set of tropes to produce a large body of text, and I said text meaning novels as well as films, until these tropes have got established as conventions. Over the last few decades, the conventions of pandemic narrative have been used prolifically in popular culture, so much so that they provide an easily um, they provide an easily recognizable template of narration. This template, as I will show, includes figures and concepts such as, what we call patient zero and super spreader, zones and spaces like hotspots and social trends like social distancing, containment zones, quarantine centers. I mean, popular culture reflected in films and fiction in the last 30, 40 years already had made uh, had invented a lexicon which has now become a part of our everyday vocabulary. I mean, until 3 months back, I don't think we probably knew or were familiar with certain phrases and certain terms like super spreader or patient zero. So one of the defining things that the COVID crisis has already done is that, number one, it has changed our social reality, making it more disruptive, creating more fault lines, establishing new and sharpened hierarchies, social hierarchies based on class, based on nations, based on communities, based on religion. On the other hand, it has also substantially changed the signifying systems by which we define culture, by which we disseminate, films and fiction to audiences and readers. Surprisingly, despite the repetitiveness and the duplication of a large number of what I called the tropes and conventions of the pandemic narrative, surprisingly, in spite of the repetitive use, a pandemic narrative has always, whether in film or in popular fiction, has always enjoyed or always invited a tremendous fan following among audiences and readers. Uh, the core of a pandemic narrative is a basic plot archetype. And what is this basic plot archetype? A pandemic narrative is embedded with a standard storyline about, all pandemic narratives have one central storyline. And what is the storyline? Well, these narratives begin by showing how a virus, there's an outbreak of a contagion, there is an infectious virus which poses a threat to a community. It then describes the ensuing panic response of the people, causing oftentimes manifesting in complete social disorder. And then the narrative ends, whether in film or fiction, the narrative ends with the triumph of medical experts and health authorities. This is what I call a pandemic plot archetype. In other words, a pandemic narrative is one that maps a trajectory from social pandemonium to what I call social equilibrium. I'll repeat what I said. I believe that a pandemic narrative is one that maps a trajectory from social pandemonium to social equilibrium. Since I've been talking about how pandemic narratives have been prolifically used in popular films and popular literature, a quick examples of pandemic narratives from popular fiction include Michael Crichton's The Andromeda Strain, Stephen King's The Stand, Jeff Ryman's The Child Garden, Nicholas Griffith's, and and in terms of films, of course, Hollywood blockbusters, Contagion and Outbreak. These are only representative examples. I mean, the body of work that we call pandemic culture is enormous. It is enormous. Now that we have a working definition of the pandemic narrative, and I've given you some examples, uh, in the next part of my talk, I will attempt three things. Number one, I will try and establish the connection of some of the key tropes and conventions of the pandemic narrative with the current crisis and its global impact. Number two, I will show that the pandemic narrative reconfigures some of our fundamental ideas about nation, borders, and migration. And third, I will try and apply the tropes of a pandemic narrative in the reading of a few examples from popular fiction and Hollywood films. So let's take a few examples of pandemic tropes and how we can connect these tropes or these conventions of a narrative with some of the features of the global pandemonium. The first trope that I would like to highlight is that a pandemic narrative foregrounds or establishes itself as a mythic narrative. A pandemic narrative is a mythic narrative in the sense that it presents the outbreak story, as an epic battle, between two antagonists, and the antagonists, the main actors or players whose opposition builds this pandemic narrative, turns this pandemic narrative into a mythic narrative. One, of course, is the cunning and, the virus, which is often shown as a very cunning and deadly virus. And of course, its human antagonists. So in both popular novels and Hollywood films, some of which the previous slide showed you, the protagonist is often depicted as a medical professional or a research scientist, and who's shown to use his or her intelligence, reason, and courage to detect, to expose, and to outwit a sly pathogen with a self-mutating ability. Take, for example, if we asked, I see that there are 68 participants right now live on this forum. If one were to do an online quick survey as to which was the most watched film that people saw during the lockdown, I think 99 out of 100 people would say Contagion. Contagion is perhaps the most watched lockdown film. And this was a film, a techno thriller that came out in 2011, almost a decade before today's COVID virus. A techno thriller made by Steven Soderbergh, the very famous American director. And what I like to draw your attention to the film Contagion is that the narrative of Contagion, Contagion, in fact, follows what I'm saying is a mythic narrative. So the film shows that one of the lead characters, played by Kate Winslet, she plays the role of a U.S. epidemic intelligence officer. Until my research on this, I never knew that there was something called an epidemic intelligence officer. We know about secret services and intelligence agencies that keep tab and monitor and surveil human bodies and humans. But this Kate Winslet plays the role of a U.S. epidemic intelligence officer who is investigating a global outbreak, but who loses her own life, unfortunately, in the film, of course, in the battle with the virus. Now, the film celebrates her and a few other characters, major characters, in lead roles as heroes who fight to contain the contagion and to save humanity. So, we witness what we witness in the film in a very ironical way again is how the unchecked mobility and border crossing of a white woman epidemiologist becomes a threat to the global social order in the way in which she becomes one of the carriers or one of the vectors instrumental in spreading the disease. So in a narrative, in the narrative of a heroic epidemic, Contagion shows how complex and confusing uh, borders and traveling can be in the time of an infectious disease. What I find interesting about the film is that it dramatizes the action using the common trope of binaries in an epic battle. When I say an epic battle, of course we are reminded of all classic mythologies and classic legends and classic literature. But in a pandemic narrative, what I am suggesting is that it mythologizes the same kind of epic battles that from the Greek classics to the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, except in this case, uh, the heroic human is pitted against a maleficent microbe in the larger, and then transposed into the larger narrative of good versus evil. So the mythic element in a pandemic narrative dramatically foregrounds a conflict, and this is crucial, a conflict where it's not just good versus evil, but a conflict where Western science, Western medicine, Western technology is pitted against a microbe which is anthropomorphized into um, a deadly, invisible enemy. Why I say this is crucial is that the film Contagion, a film like Contagion, when it shows, the narrative shows that it is a fight unto the finish between a human protagonist and a pathogenic enemy. It projects the fight or the struggle in terms of a combat for the very survival of humanity. And it obviously therefore shows heroic individuals who risk their lives. But what is noticeable is that the film, in showing projecting this kind of epic battle, itself is infected with an unfortunate racial contamination, with a racial bias. If it is a humanity of the West that a pandemic film like Contagion shows, then it is a humanity, not a universal humanity, it is a humanity of the West. And the heroes, predictably, are all white men and white women. So, the other interesting thing about how the pandemic narrative is turned into a mythical, heroic narrative is that it kind of engenders the film's narrative is, of course, in terms of dialogue, in terms of a specific and a very specialized use of vocabulary. And therefore, the film often uses terms that are now part of our everyday, like I said, social lexicon, COVID warriors like. So the war, the film projects the narrative, the big fight, the epic battle, as a war against, the use of the word war against pathogens, or the war against virus. And the warriors, the protagonists are called pandemic warriors, like COVID warriors as we. So it's interesting, therefore, to see that our own social vocabulary, which this present ongoing outbreak has brought about, the change that it has brought about, actually goes back. It can be connected to the specific way in which language of popular films and popular novels have been used decades back. But this, as I said, this mythic narrative to me is problematic, because when we examine it a little closely, let me take a common trope, the trope of containment, and isolation, which is often foregrounded in Hollywood films. The other film that that many people have watched during the outbreak, during the lockdown, has been this film called Outbreak. Outbreak is a medical thriller made in 1995. It's a medical thriller film made in 1995, based in fact on Richard Preston's best-selling book Hot Zone. The film has a scene showing how American troops blow up a mercenary camp in Zaire, a banana republic in Central Africa, and probably also a hotspot of American-sponsored terrorism, when there is an outbreak of a viral disease caused by a monkey. So there are two scenes that the film Outbreak shows, with one that takes place in the jungles of Zaire, where a camp is demolished by American troops, and the second scene, which happens in the latter part of the movie, is where 20 years later, in the time sequence that the movie shows, 20 years later, when the same virus resurfaces through a career and afflicts people in a small town, this time in Southern California, the authorities, the same authorities who had ordered rather the camp in Zaire in Central Africa to be destroyed, to be demolished, where of course hundreds of local people died. The same authorities in California, when the scene shifts to California and the same disease breaks through in this small town, the same authorities refuse to destroy the place. And it's interesting. And what is significant to note is that in the scene, the governor of this town or this place is shown saying, "But these are Americans." So, clearly in the heroic narrative of pandemics, not all bodies matter. Racial typologies of bodies make some people expendable and some people, while others are not. But my argument is that popular stories have consequences. I mean, it's not just about fan following. It's not just about being read and watched by so many people across the world. It has some serious consequences. It has some serious material and physical manifestations in the way in which we read and interact with people. We behave and interact with people. These pandemic narratives, like the one from Contagion and Outbreak, seem to disseminate fact as fiction, no doubt, but at the same time, the narratives plot imaginative terrains, traveling routes, and border immunities of the contagion in a very, very racially schematized manner. This is especially true, as I said, with Hollywood films like Outbreak and Contagion. Remember that Contagion is among the many other Hollywood films on pandemic or epidemics. Contagion is a standalone film. It is unique and singular because it's a film that was heavily invested in the science of epidemics. I mean, there was a lot of research and a lot of study. The film was based on a lot of research, ground research, and a lot of study before it was adapted turned into a screenplay. And so the film has a specific, like I said, has a heavy investment in science and medicine. And so, although it is not flawlessly accurate, the film depicts a rather scary but a realistic trajectory of the fatal virus and its vectors. Scene after scene in the film, the camera focuses on doorknobs, the credit cards, empty glasses, napkins, airport lounges, and of course handshakes. There is a specific focus where these visuals are foregrounded, and so what happens is that the human action that the film shows is by a careful foregrounding of objects and spaces that carry the menace of the contagion. So The film graphically manipulates the audience gaze and makes us feel, makes the real images, the real scenes look real life-like. And this is precisely my point, that the film seems to invite us and engages us by, by subtly projecting a thoroughly researched, but nevertheless subjective presentation of the contagion as empirical truths endorsed and validated by science and medicine. And by doing so, uh, the film, more than any other Hollywood blockbuster in recent times, plays a crucial role in maneuvering what lay audiences make of epidemics in real life. So, because films, as we know, are one of the most popular mediums of popular culture, pandemic narratives in films generate a specific discourse. A discourse that is steeped in racism, a discourse that is steeped in some of the unequal developments of globalization, a discourse that influences public perception of truths. I mean, we are living in a post-truth age. Truths that are debatable, truths that are contestable, but the presentation, but the way in which the film presents it sort of presents a truth that is uncontestable because it is based on science, because it is a well-researched film based on science and medicine. And that is the problem that I'm trying to highlight here. This brings me to another problematic trope of pandemic narratives. What I referred to in one of my previous slides. You know, a pandemic narrative, the second trope that I'm talking about, the pandemic narrative always presents the place of the origin of a contagion as a geography of disease, or as a topography, what I call a topography of moral pollution. Again, let me take you back to the film, because I'm using films and popular novels to illustrate my ideas. Or rather, this time, let me take you back to two novels, popular techno thrillers written by Michael Crichton. The first one was called The Andromeda Strain. This was written in 1969. And then 30 years later, Michael Crichton came out with a sequel to the original Andromeda Strain called The Andromeda Evolution. What is revealing? What I find revealing is the connection which the original novel establishes in its sequel to the source and origin of this deadly disease. It's a fictional disease, but very much based on one of the actual viruses that broke out in Africa. So the story of an outbreak in the Andromeda strain is caused no less by deadly extraterrestrial microorganisms. I mean, the source of the contagion in the original novel, The Andromeda Strain, is shown to be extraterrestrial microorganisms. But 30 years later, in the book that he wrote as a sequel, The Andromeda Evolution, the outbreak, the film shows or rather the book shows the outbreak and traces it to the deep jungles of Africa. To me, these two books, written by the same writer, and both bestsellers, both turned into films, are very crucial for how they transfuse in the public perception a certain way of looking at Africa, or crucially for what Africa symbolizes, what Africa symbolizes, a place that breeds evil, disease, and contamination. So this is an example of how the trope of migrant microbes and traveling bodies used by the pandemic narrative symbolically attaches to certain places a geography of disease and a topography of pollution. And contemporary popular fiction and films are suffused with such tropes, which I believe could continue to perpetuate the legacy of imperialism and racist narratives. Like the discourse of colonial medicine and tropical diseases produced by Europeans in the 18th and 19th centuries, pandemic narratives in recent times are often inscribed with an inherent racist bias or a racist ideology, ascribing to uh, ascribing to non-European places a pollution that is both physical and moral. And this is important because Conrad's heart of darkness seems to continue to darken many a pandemic narrative in modern times. I wish to draw your attention there is a quote on the slide from a very popular non-fiction book written by Richard Preston called The Hot Zone, on which, of course, the film Outbreak was made. And I want to draw your attention to the vocabulary that is used in this non-fiction book, where it says that a hot virus in the rainforest lives within a 24-hour plane flight from every city on Earth. All the Earth cities are connected by a web of airline flights. The web is a network, etc. Now, notice how the passage carefully establishes a particular place as a geography of disease. I mean, look at the images, look at the metaphors that are used. Hot virus, rainforest, all of them connecting or establishing or associating a highly alarming contagious outbreak to a specific place, and that is Africa. Notice also that the phrase "every city in the world" from Preston's passage is quickly shortlisted in the next sentence to Paris, New York, and Los Angeles. I mean, this is precisely the way in which imperial tropes worked and Said highlighted, for example, in his classic book, two books, Orientalism and Culture and Imperialism. So the point that I'm trying to make is that in these discourses, places in the East, Far East, or Near East were to the Western imagination sources of fear and fantasy. And such places are often linked not only to death, decay, and disease, but to a certain moral turpitude itself, as if the place was not only the source of decay and disease, but the people of the place seem to suffer from a moral deviation or a moral degeneration. And that is exactly what Said brought out in his classic work, Orientalism, the manner in which an entire arsenal, the production of Western knowledge about other people, introduced a dichotomy between the East and the West in terms of savage and barbaric places and advanced and progressive places. So we may infer that that while epidemics and plagues have happened before and are going to happen even after the COVID crisis, only certain ones rivet and draw the attention, especially in popular culture. So we have, while we have Ebola and SARS and the HIV/AIDS epidemic, all of these have been described as emerging contagions or emerging infections. But in most popular films and fiction, I'm not generalizing, but in most popular films and fiction that are being produced in the West, they are shown to arise from a sort of primeval murk, which is associated with Africa or Asia, where Africa and Asia become the origins or the sources of contagion, and these then infiltrate developed countries. It is never the other way around. The third trope of a pandemic narrative is what I call border promiscuity or border immunities. I'm going to try and show to you, take an example from, once again, a scene from a film, and show to you that the current crisis, the issues of the current crisis, has such a similarity with the kind of filmic tropes that pandemic narratives have adopted. So, the pandemic narrative seems to be anchored on a trope that I feel congeals border immunity with border promiscuity. And the narrative of such films frequently shows that the contagion is transmitted by human carriers who transgress and violate some moral code in the first place. Uh, what I mean to say is that the pandemic narrative shows characters in films crossing borders, but before crossing physical borders or borders of countries and nations, they seem to first of all, cross or violate a moral border or a moral boundary. And what is the nature of this moral boundary? Well, the boundary is often shown as, for example, illicit sex, drug use, or arms trafficking. Let me explain this with a film, with a scene rather, from Soderbergh's Contagion, and a film that was inspired by the outbreak of SARS in 2004. This is one of the opening scenes of the film, which shows one of the characters, one of the lead female characters, a role play named Beth, played by Gwyneth Paltrow, and she's shown in the film as an American corporate executive, and she's speaking over the phone with a man. And this is how the conversation, if you take a look at the hand that holds the phone, you'll notice that there's a wedding ring visible on her phone answering hand, and these are very very minute but pretty symbolic signifiers. So the conversation the film shows that takes place in this scene is something like this. There is a call and she answers, and then she says, the man on the phone says, yeah, I'll read out. Yeah, John Neal here. You just left the hotel room and left without saying goodbye. Yeah, and she says, and ended up being delayed. Sorry, I was panicking. The man says, if I don't get to see you again, I just wanted to say it was nice to see you again. And Beth replies, it was nice to see you too. And then, Beth cuffs.
What happened? I I think something is wrong. Maybe light or something. They are working on it. Am I audible? Okay, let's wait.
Yes, audible.
Sorry, friends. Some network problem is there. Within 2 minutes, be solved. Please wait. Please wait. There is some network because of load shedding. So very soon, Dr. Prantik Banerjee will join us.
Thank you, sir.
Please wait.
It was such a wonderful session that nobody wanted a break.
Technology has advantages as well as certain disadvantages also. And technology makes us develop our patience.
Yeah.
So now, in this pandemic era, we are learning how to be more and more patient.
True.
I hope Dr. Gamini agrees with me.
Yeah.
In between, Dr. Neeru Tandon also had certain problems and she was not visible. Now she is beautifully visible.
Thanks to you all. Thanks due to you. And you really deserve our thanks for just creating this wonderful webinar.
Of course.
All my friends from Kanpur, like Jaba Kusum, Anjita, they all
Trying
are
from our end to say that the problem is solved and very soon it will be solved. I know a kind of disappointment for the participants, but let us wait and we hope that very soon Prantik will join us.
Dr. Prantik has earned a lot of fans for himself by this lecture.
Please presented दूसरे पे से भी कर सकते हैं
Dr. Gamini, we have heard Prantik Banerjee right from the beginning.
Yeah.
So what like to comment on this? He has almost touched every aspect that has cropped up during this pandemic.
Actually, I also watched this film Contagion only recently, you know, when I mean just I mean almost locked down to my home. So the Contagion, of course, is catching up because of the kind of new lifestyle we are getting used to in this atmosphere, you know, in this morbid atmosphere. So certain points, of course, are very, very true because now he mentioned that the heroes are always of European origin, and that, of course, is not only in that is not only in films of films on plagues and diseases, but also in other things. Also, you can see racial prejudice being spread through. It's actually a pathetic experience for us. A pathetic experience for us because all colored people are either dependents or villains. So that was actually a good point Dr. Banerjee made in this in his presentation. So the thing is now I think this corona situation that affected most of those Western countries got to know some of the Asian values. I saw even Prince Charles just using this gesture, putting the hands together and saying hello. We use this in Sri Lanka. I think we have been somewhat influenced by India because our great cultural revivals some thousands of years ago happened thanks to Buddhism and thanks to the exchanges we had during King Ashoka's period. So we are using this, this is very common in Sri Lanka. And now this is actually being practiced even in Europe. When those leaders meet each other, they also use this. So this is one good thing that they learn from us. And the other thing, now if I were to talk about the commercial exchanges in Sri Lanka and so on, our tea is catching a new market because of the corona situation. People drink tea, more tea. Now, alcoholic drinks, I think, are somewhat hostile to the physical condition people should maintain in this type of an atmosphere. So they need to have some alternative drink, and as a result, we are actually getting a new market for spices and our cloves and cinnamon and tea. So you can see now under this trend of globalization, people are getting used to new avenues for survival. So as a result, I'm sure people get to know more of the value of the countries like India, which have actually contributed a lot. I mean, not just yesterday or the day before, but for thousands of years, because they inspired civilizations. I mean, times immemorial. So therefore, as Dr. Banerjee stressed that this pandemonium will be replaced by global pandemonium, or social pandemonium will be replaced by kind of an equilibrium, because we are all now victims of one huge menace. So for now, ultimately, our main aim has become survival. How to survive this situation, how to face this situation, how to get through, and so on. So that actually we can't cultivate any kind of immunity if we don't depend on us. Therefore, we have to be interactive and interdependent in the face of a crisis like this. I mean, a common crisis where you can't just point your fingers at each other, but you have to just face it as people of a similar interest and ideology. So I think Dr. Praveen, you must be agree with me. You may agree with me, because we are all, as I mentioned, I mean, quoting from your brochure, as I mentioned, we are very vulnerable, and we are very much unimmune before many natural disasters that happen. So we can't actually say this is my territory, or we can't put a border and say you should not enter because this is my territory, because we have to always be ready to leave this anytime we consume our energy. I can actually go through this and the other thing, now some stigmas being attached to different communities. For example, Africa symbolized a place that breeds evil, disease, and contamination. This, of course, is a very cowboy type attitude, because you must have seen those Western films where always you find a native or a slave brought there, a Native American or a slave brought there from Africa is a villain, like that. So they are the sort of spreaders of evil. So, and then but today we can see the people have come to a new realization, because those Western countries which are somewhat boastful about their very advanced health systems and then administrative systems, intelligence systems, and all, they have become the greatest victims. Actually, we are not. I don't know. I'm praying for all these lives, and every time when I see news, I get disheartened by what I hear on TV or on radio or in the internet. But anyway, these things sometimes we have to realize much in advance. Also, it's a pattern of life. Now, here actually we may sort of look up to the teachings of the ancient gurus who have sort of promoted non-violence, who have promoted even vegetarianism, who have promoted some sort of discipline in day-to-day life for people to carry on with. So from all these, actually, now here you can see this. Now this, contagion is transmitted. He says contagion is transmitted by human carriers who transgress and violate some moral code. These moral codes are very strongly documented in our systems and sometimes etched into our minds also, because of our upbringing. So we are somewhat contented and somewhat, happy with the simple lifestyles we have developed. We don't need many amenities, and we are still living in a certain way that we can afford to maintain, So our economy, sometimes these countries have been branded, I don't know who, somehow by some system as first world, second world, third world, and so on, right? But this type of political classification, economic classification, doesn't have any base now. Because in a crisis like this,
I want to interrupt, sir.
Yeah, sure.
I'm so thankful to you, Gamini Fonseca, sir, for filling in the time.
Yeah,
But
thank you.
the technological problems are still there.
And I was also actually
municipal authorities have decided to fell the trees around Dr. Prantik Banerjee sir's house, and
Yes.
therefore he doesn't have any internet connection.
Sure, sure.
So we cannot relink to him. And we are all very sorry. He was having a very wonderful session. But as we see, there are many slips between the cup and the mouth. And
Yeah.
a few slides were remaining, and we would have loved to hear him. But again, all the organizers are very sorry about that. And they will be sending you the recorded PPT, and you can go back to whatever he had to say in the few slides remaining.
So thank you very much.
Now let
Thank
us
you for
move
the
on. I
privilege.
think Banerjee sir
Yeah.
has said in his talk that the pandemonium has ushered in a culture of pandemonium, and we are and citing various examples through books, films, and even mythology.
Yeah.
He has talked about medical fiction. He has metaphorically used the theme migrant microbes traveling in bodies and border
Yeah,
immunities.
that I'll cover.
Let us proceed further and I have the pleasure of formally introducing the chairperson of this plenary session, Dr. Neeru Tandon. Dr. Neeru Tandon, Associate Professor, Department of English, VSSD College, Kanpur, is the first and only professor to have the degree of DLit in English from CSJMU Kanpur since its inception. MHRD and UJC have appointed her as paper coordinator for their projects. EPG Pathshala. She is the founder, chairperson, and coordinator, LTI Kanpur chapter. She is the chief editor, Eliminity, an international journal of literature, language, and culture, and associate editor of the Atlantic Critical Review, Delhi, the Expression, Firozabad, Sahasa, Hyderabad, Journal of All India English Teachers Association. She is the executive member, North Zone AESI. Dr. Tandon is teaching since last 30 years in a PG college. She has several publications to her credit that includes 25 books and 99 research papers and few poems. She is PDP trainer for schools and technical colleges, paper setter, and the course coordinator at IGNOU MPhil program on gender studies and CSIMU. She has written 34 modules on English literature, language, and linguistics, and 101 lectures delivered by her are available on YouTube. She has written course books for children as well. It is a very impressive data wherein Dr. Neeru Tandon is seen to be adept at catering to all age groups of learners. She is also the IQAC coordinator, which I think few English teachers can escape nowadays. Without further delay, I request Dr. Neeru Tandon Madam to deliver her chairperson's remarks. Over to Dr. Neeru Tandon Madam.
Thank you, Madhvi. Am I audible? Okay. So, Dr. Prantik Banerjee, he deserves our thanks for a wonderful presentation. And our thanks are due to Dr. Praveen Joshi, Dr. Urmila Dabir, and of course, Madhvi. In fact, Dr. Prantik beautifully described the reality around us. And believe me, till this moment, the migrant microbes, borders, and immunities were the words. Now they are part of a theory and concept. Actually, this is an era when negative is a new positive and positive is scary. So, Dr. Prantik started discussing immediate changes brought about by pandemic. He talked about exodus as everyday reality and made it interesting by quoting Shakespeare and connecting the bard with today's situation. COVID has created a different culture, life-altering atmosphere, threatening and disintegrating social order. He also discussed two disasters, virus and collapsing of social order, and he mentioned the third disaster as border sealing, racial profiling, and suffering of migrant workers. He also discussed new geographies of disease and color coded zones. I feel he he clothed our sentiments and views beautifully. His description of popular culture, including media, films, pandemic narrative, constitute the meta-narrative of popular culture. How these pandemic narratives become part of popular culture by providing template of certain issues. He gave examples of pandemic narrative by discussing fiction, films like Stephen King's The Stand and film like Outbreak. We enjoyed pandemic tropes and global pandemonium, whatever he discussed. So the pandemic.
लोगों ने बहुत डिसिप्लिन किया, ऐसा नहीं है। और नागपुर में क्या है, दूसरी चीज बताता हूँ। ये
The
गर्मी
pandemic is creating new
बाहर नहीं निकलता और वो वायरस भी है, वो इतनी गर्मी में
not know that pandemic is creating new problems now. And government is increasingly introducing measures to tackle the cause of the new security to level of COVID. But boundaries were gone and for us also a real maximum they had to for all of us. While we were discussing about borders where we go, I was just reminded of all those tribes who are undergoing vaccine and the pattern of the going with the border and the root cause. I'm just quoting a few lines that explain what Dr. Karthik was saying. The border is a bird that is too strong, holding things up but making it hard. The border is a restless wind that does not stop. The border says stop to the wind, but the wind speaks another language and keeps going. The border has always been a welcome stopping place, but is now a stop sign, now always red. So, Dr. Pratik has enlightened us on this issue, and let us use this understanding to ensure that migrants are not left behind in this pandemic. We have global challenges, and all of us are supposed to contribute. I will sum up by thanking him once again and with one comment and one question for all of you. My comment is that situation of crisis tests the inner strength of individuals and communities. Don't panic, but be very careful and keep moving while staying home. And my question to ponder is, when boundaries are created, communities get divided. Worse still, they create a culture of fear and suspicion in which humanity and empathy get drowned. Are we moving towards such a society? Let's think about it. Once again, sharing. Thank you. Thank you, folks. And once again, on behalf of all the participants, I thank Dr. Prantik Banerjee.
Thank you, Dr. Neeru Tandon, Madam, for your expert comments. The webinar has no doubt led to its expectations of providing a feast of scholarly talks for people across the globe. I'm thankful to the resource person, Dr. Prantik Banerjee, for obliging us with his web presence and delivering a highly profound presentation on his decided theme. I am also equally thankful to the chairperson of this session, Dr. Neeru Tandon, Madam, for giving her kind consent and for her web presence and throwing further light on the theme of the speaker. American futurist Alvin Toffler commented, "The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn." I think we all teachers have been fast learners in these 2 months of lockdown. We have unlearned the podium mic system setup and switched fast to the webinar culture. I also personally thank, on behalf of all delegates across the globe, the organizers of this international webinar on this relevant topic. I declare that the plenary session 1 comes to an end here.
Sequence of the
Good afternoon to one and all. I welcome you all in this second plenary session. For this session, we have with us Dr. Sayan Day as a resource person and Dr. Asha Chobe is chairing this session. Let me introduce our resource person, Dr. Sayan Day, who is an internationally acclaimed academician. He is from West Bengal, Calcutta. Presently, he is working as a lecturer in Yonfula Centenary College, Royal University of Bhutan. He has also worked as an assistant professor in Amity Law School, Noida. He has rendered his services as a lecturer at Faculty of Humanities, Royal Thimphu College, Bhutan. He has numerous publications to his credit. He has been awarded several international conference and project grants for his ardent research work, like German Search Foundation Conference Grant in 2016, Charles Wallace India Trust Fellowship in 2017, GAPS Travel Grant in 2018, Journal of International Women Studies Fellowship, and Volkswagen Foundation Scholarship in 2019. Presently, he is working on the book History, Myth, and Post-Colonial Consciousness Theory and Praxis. It's my honor and proud privilege to invite Dr. Sayan Day to deliver his talk on From Chronology to Chronology, New Racism and Humanitarian Crisis Amidst COVID-19 in Contemporary India. Over to Dr. Sayan.
Thank you very much,
Dr.
respected madam.
Will be chairing this session.
So, am I audible to all of you? Is it fine?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So, at the very outset, I would like to extend my sincere thankfulness to respected Vice Chancellor Sir, respected Secretary sirs who were part of the inaugural session in the morning, respected Praveen Joshi sir for extending this warm invitation in this really wonderful event. And actually, it was also a wonderful privilege to listen to Dr. Banerjee in the last lecture, but unfortunately, very unfortunately, we could not complete it and I was more interested. As time was passing by, my interest was increasing because somewhat, when I was listening to his lecture, listening to his analytical perspectives, dimensions, and when I was reflecting back to my own perspectives, which I'm going to share briefly through this lecture, I saw a wonderful connection, especially with the question of racism that he was bringing in gradually with respect to the movies and the scenarios and the various kind of situations that he was analyzing in the process. So the topic or the perspective I would like to share, the perspective which I am kind of have kind of analyzed, or I'm going to analyze in this particular talk, is from chronology to coronology. Chronology to coronology, neo-racism and the humanitarian crisis in the contemporary India. Now, what I'll do is I'll divide my lecture into three parts. The first part of my lecture will be what do I mean by basically from chronology to coronology, first one. Number two part will be that how, having put forth my arguments in the first section, I'll talk about how the perspective of resystematization of racism is taking place at the time of COVID-19 in India, And the third section and the concluding section at my talk will be that what do I mean by the term coronology and how it is reconfiguring a neo-racial order in contemporary India. So what I'm going to do is, as I go on, so basically we see this element of racism because I'm focusing on on a very specific element here in this talk, that is racism. Now, this element of racism is not new to us. I mean, in terms of experiences, in terms of our knowledge elements about racism in India, it's not very new. I mean, we have been through books, through articles, through conferences, reflections, and also a lot of us people may be there who are in the audience or may not be in the audience, but at least in the country, that who have been experiencing racism in various ways. But the problem happens, or the problem comes up when or how do we interpret the term racism? Now, usually what happens, we interpret the term racism by default, consciously or unconsciously. On most occasions, we interpret the term racism mostly based on the color binary. So we interpret it as like black, brown, white, then yellow, etc. So these color elements very much still dominate the discourse of racism across the globe, or to be very specific, as I'm talking in the Indian perspective with respect to India. But there is a problem, there is a major problem. I mean, there are a lot of problems, but one major problem in this kind of interpretation is that it's a very narrow and very generalized version of interpretation of racism. Because now, why do I call it narrow? Why do I call it generalized? Because one of the major reason is what we see here, that when we talk about race or racism today in the contemporary era across the world exists much beyond this color binary. And this is actually one of the quite prominent South African historian. His name is Sabelo Ndlebuje Gatsheni. He argues that, you see, the notion of racism, it's been long time that the notion of racism has transcended from the color line. I quote unquote color line. This phrase was used by Afro-American philosopher William Du Bois, towards epistemic line. Professor Sabelo argues it as that towards epistemic line. That is where racism is no more defined in terms of color, like whether you're black. I mean, it is there, obviously, black, brown, yellow, reddish black, reddish brown, whatever, so many connotations are there with color. It's always there. But we have to, if you have to get a holistic dimension of it, we have to venture beyond it, which is actually very, very important. Now, the next is what we really find is now what is meant by this epistemic line? Because my understanding of the racism that has been reconfigured or re-acknowledged at the time of this COVID-19 in India is basically based on this notion of the epistemic line of racism. So what is this epistemic line of racism? This epistemic line of racism is where racism may not be physically visible as it used to be at the time of the European colonizers in India with respect to the color line. But it is very much, so systematically entrenched, so systematically embedded within our habitual practices of life that we personally often as individuals, we fail to understand that what we are doing, what we are expressing, or what we, through our body language, through our words, is a form of racism. And that is what is happening currently in India, especially, and it has been happening for a long time. I mean, it is not new that, I mean, at least from my childhood days, I know stories of that, how, students or, people who are the, local natives of northeastern India, they have been facing racism. We know that how people from the southern parts of India, because of their skin color, because of their language, they have been facing racism, because of their, like the way their outer appearance exists. Based on that, they face racism. We also see how, in terms of religion, how we have certain racial stereotypes or Islamophobic racism we see that is very much prominent across the globe or very specifically in India. So, these dimensions of racism, which are existing beyond the color line, but is very much manifested in the epistemic line, that is through our forms and various patterns of our regular systems of knowledge production, is not new. So obviously what I'm going to say is not new, or what I have said till now is not new. But what is happening is the problem that is coming up, because with this element of COVID-19, and with so many incidents that are taking place of racism against the Northeasterns, against the transgenders, against the Muslims in India, and also about against several other communities and groups. But obviously I'm not going to focus, or I won't be able to focus within the time frame on everybody. So I'm going to touch upon three elements. One is obviously on the Muslims, one on the other hand is on the transgenders, and also the other component I'm going to touch upon is on the people who are the local natives in Northeast. What we see is there is a consistent effort to reconfigure the already existing racial dimensions in the country, the already existing racial dynamics in the country. Now, how this reconfiguration is basically taking place, that is an important question. So how this reconfiguration, how this process of re-understanding is also reorientation is actually taking place. And that actually leads me to the second section of my talk. And that second section of my talk, as I said, the re-systematization of racism during COVID-19. So you see, first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you, which I'm pretty sure you must have all been reading newspapers and a lot of documents and open edition articles, and you must be knowing about the different kinds of racial incidents that are taking place. But I think that at this moment I need to read a few anecdotes and cite a few examples to show that how this racial dynamics, the pre-existing racial dynamics, are getting reconfigured at the time of COVID-19. So let me read a few to you. Now, the first one I'm going to read about is there is a New Delhi-based lawyer and human rights activist from Manipur. I am pretty sure many of you must be knowing the name as well. Her name is Alana Golmay. And Alana Golmay shares two instances. One is she says that I think it is like 2 to 3 weeks back. 2 to 3 weeks back, Alana Golmay was sharing that I was called coronavirus in NCRT campus, and my niece was called coronavirus in the Delhi University campus. And she actually, through her Facebook account, she shares a well-detailed incident of what happened with her niece. She says that today so her niece actually wrote this message to Alana Golmay on WhatsApp, and she just copy pastes it on Facebook. Today, no one wanted to sit with me in e-rickshaw. People saw me and they didn't get on the e-rickshaw, but instead took another one. Waited for 10 to 15 minutes, but no one got in. One old lady was going to get in, but she saw me and she hopped into the next one. Funny thing was, the other e-rickshaws were filling up with people except the one I was in. So this is one incident. Similarly, there is another incident that is, from a group of students, and it is from, Thakshom Singhajit, who is the General Secretary of the Manipur Students Association in the New Delhi, and he says, my colleagues were recently attacked and verbally abused outside Delhi. We have always faced racism in the past, but this time it was taken to a new level. There was another student from Manipur who complained that I was not allowed to enter a grocery store during the lockdown, and the owner turned me and my friends. And so obviously when the complaint was lodged in the police station, and the guard, who was security guard who actually shoved them off, he was questioned that why did you do so? He said that basically when I looked at this group of people, they looked like Chinese, And as we know that coronavirus has emerged in China, so my fear was that these Chinese looking people must be carrying coronavirus with them. So I was afraid and I just drove them off. So you see, these are some incidents from the northeastern people, and there are others as well. Like, for example, a resident lady from Nagaland shares her pain that how she was taken to the hospital because her landowner complained that she looks like Chinese, she's from the northeast, so she should be taken to the hospital. So in spite of no, symptoms or no problems, when other people did not undergo that, experience, it was like 3-4 weeks back when the coronavirus thing was just getting in India. She was taken to the hospital. She was kept there for over 24 hours. She was charged highly. She was forced to undergo different forms of medical tests, etc. So many things were actually going on together. So this was just few examples from a group of people from the Northeast. Now, in a similar pattern, if you look at the transgender people as well, they had this similar kind of experience. A lot of transgenders, in fact, I'll be obviously sharing with you some very touching incidents that what happened with the transgenders, like some of the transgender activists who were actually sharing their experiences over different social network sites. So, there is this transgender worker. She is from the Pratyay Gender Trust, and her name is Aninda Hajra. She is a trans woman actually, and she was sharing that they do not have the social privilege of operating within a distant online. So they means the transgenders, when their lives are precariously balanced on the thread of social interactions and functions. So, these kind of social distancing, these kind of physical distancing, what kind of impact it had on their lives. Another transgender was saying that being a trans person in India during COVID-19 pandemic is another form of pandemic for them, is another form of fear for them. Because while revealing an incident, while Rajasthan civil rights workers have demanded, and this is a story from Rajasthan, while Rajasthan civil rights workers have demanded relief packages for daily wage workers, the Kerala and Uttar Pradesh state governments have already announced financial aid in addition to bulk rations for the next 6 months. But the unfortunate thing is there is no separate mention of transgenders as beneficiaries and any other proportions. And I am personally in touch with various transgender people, and who are activists in different parts of the country, who works closely with the government, with different NGOs, etc. What they have been sharing is that, the very, very saddest part is that these transgender people are being left out of all forms of privileges. And the mainframe privileges that is going to the mainframe social structure, the transgenders are being completely neglected. But you see the irony that there are some of the transgenders who have started initiatives like Community Kitchen. There are some transgenders, and it is open to all. It is not just open to transgender people. It is open to anyone and everybody, whoever is in trouble. And there are also transgenders who are visiting different places, different communities where people are widely affected. And those transgenders are extending their helping hands as much as possible. Similarly, in a similar pattern, we see that with respect to the Tablighi Markaz incident, how this very presence or the element of the communal divide, the communal tension that has been historically existing between the Hindus and the Muslims for a long, long time since the colonial era, was further racially provoked or Islamophobically provoked by the newspaper people, by various governing structures, and several other individuals. Obviously, any kind of gathering, any kind of physical closeness at this time of this, crisis is highly condemnable. And whether it's being on part of Hindus, Muslim, Christians, Jews, or which religion, which political party, or which political color, it doesn't really matter at all. It's a crisis, and we have to follow. And so obviously, people protesting against this incident was not, nothing wrong about it. But the problem is how this incident, this Tablighi Markaz gathering was projected, how what kind of, the different grammars of violence that was implemented during this time in order to project this incident as something, as if before the Tablighi Markaz incident, India did not had any case of coronavirus. Immediately after the incident, coronavirus crept in India. It was projected in that manner. If you even read at the headlines of the newspapers, you will see that how this Markaz incident, how the kind of language that has been implemented in order to define this particular incident across the country. And the language, but remember one thing, it is very important for us to remember that when before and after, even during this Tablighi, I mean, they were referred to as the Tablighi virus, the people who, and the Muslims were referred to as the Corona Jihad. If you look into the Twitter, you have ample of, instances there where they are being abused with these terms. And people across the country are acknowledging this, they are celebrating it. But the interesting part is, what we have to remember, that Tablighi Markaz were not the only incident of gathering that took place. And if we have to understand this very incident from a communal perspective, and if it has to be interpreted from a Hindu-Muslim binary perspective, then let us look also into the other kind of gathering incidents that were taking place at that time. And if we have to bring in the question of Hindu and Muslim element, then lot of Hindu-centric gatherings were taking place with respect to marriages, with respect to temple festivals, with respect to worshippings, with respect to various other forms of social gatherings where Hindu people were there or any other religious groups were there, centered on other religious groups were also taking place. But most of those incidents were subjugated in spite of the fact that the media knew only they were projected through some newspapers and OPEDs who actually hold a kind of, non-binary attitude towards informations only through those elements. But otherwise, and I obviously, for the sake of security, for the sake of, censorship, I won't be taking the names. But let me tell you, in some of the important newspaper platforms or open edition platforms, those incidents that took place, those gatherings that took place on behalf of the various political ministers, took place on behalf of various eminent businessmen and other influential people who are well known in their respective circles. So again, if there was, the question is, the most important point is, if there was a spread of, obviously, if there was a gathering, the gathering was not only centered on the Muslims. There were several other gatherings that were also taking place. But in terms of with respect to statistics, with respect to informations, the media only projected that it was as if before the Tablighi Markaz gathering, there was no coronavirus in India. After the gathering, there was a sudden arrival of the coronavirus. Yes, no doubt, the gathering actually upsurged the numbers with hugely, but again, we can't deny the fact that there was a communal angle through which it was projected. Now, having put back, keeping these elements of, or keeping these arguments at the backdrop, now what happens is, with this respect to epistemic line, this is how this epistemic line exists. With respect to this epistemic line, what happens is it generates, a kind of abyssal thinking. There is this, quite eminent Portuguese lawyer and historian, Boaventura de Sousa Santos. And, this Portuguese historian, this Portuguese lawyer, he spoke about that how this abyssal thinking, divides the world, divides the community into this side and that side. This side is the privileged side, that side is the underprivileged side. Now, if you look into these racism, this transgendered racism, Islamophobic racism, or the geographical racism, that is, or a kind of biological racism as well, which was meted against the northeastern people, what we see is they were actually systematically criminalized, victimized, and racially imprisoned in the process. And this is actually what African thinker Aimé Césaire critiques as civilizational crisis. And to quote him, actually, I've written the quote, so I'll just read it out because I find it relevant with respect to what I'm engaging with. That a civilization that proves incapable of solving the problem, it creates a decadent civilization. A civilization that chooses to close its eyes to its most crucial problems is a sick civilization. So a civilization that plays fast and loose with its principles is a dying civilization. And with respect to these incidents, as an individual, I find that these new forms of racism or the reconfiguration of the already existing forms of racism that are coming out in India, it kind of creates an impression of a decadent civilization, of a sick civilization, and also of a dying civilization. And most importantly, what we see is these kind of incidents also make us realize that this pandemic of COVID-19 is not just a biomedical pandemic, but also it is a kind of opening up to various sub layers of different other versions of pandemic. Racial pandemic, gendered pandemic, communal pandemic, which were already there, but sometimes they burst open, sometimes they are submerged. But through this pandemic, with respect to different types of incidents, it is kind of undressing these other versions of pandemics that remain systematically hidden. Now, with these elements, I come to the final part, the final section of my lecture, that is chronology. So now, as I shared with you the different chronologies of the incidents, how systematically and epistemically, in other words, through different systems of knowledge production, how racism has been consistently existing, how racism has been consistently existing in this particular country for a long time, and how it is getting reconfigured, and we should be aware of it. So this form of racism, I argue as chronology, CORONALOGY. That is how this biomedical crisis is becoming a logic for certain groups of individuals, for certain political ideologies, or widely to be said for certain institutions who are using it exclusively for the sake of, attaining their selfish motives of dividing the nation from different communal viewpoints. Now, the point is, this neo-colonial and so what I'm going to talk about is, in terms of chronology, there are three aspects. What is actually chronology leading to? That is dehumanization. Second is metaphysical borderization. And the third is necropolitics. Necropolitics was actually a term which was coined by Achille Mbembe, another very prominent Nigerian French, half Nigerian theorist. And so what is, first of all, dehumanization? So obviously the different kind of incidents, the different kinds of examples that we were talking about, that I was reflecting to, was actually a portrayal of the kind of dehumanized element that we show, the different kind of neo-colonial and the neo-racial civilizational projects that are being re-acknowledged by using COVID-19 as a weapon. And what is COVID-19 doing in the process? It is unpacking newly configured social groups who are being structured in terms of their communal, racial, gender, geographical identities, and who are being microscopically confined within the narrow chambers of racialization, criminalization, victimization, and also dehumanization. And obviously, it is not only generating these divisions in the present, what is also these kind of attitudes, these kind of negative attitudes are also in fact creating a kind of reservoir for the future of a post COVID-19 future, which will successfully enable certain groups, certain communities, certain sections of the Indian social structure to maintain scientifically, socially, culturally, and politically these forms of divisions. So it is not only a problem of the present, but also it is kind of generating a problem for the near and far future as well. The second point I'm talking about is metaphysical borderization. Now, physical borders, we know, they are geographical borders, there can be communal borders, cultural borders, physical borders are visible. But the problem with the invisible borders is that the problem with these invisible borders is what actually, Pramod Nair argues as that it is an intensifying, terrifying territoriality in which an escape route is kept open. In a way, it is an escape route is very much kept open. And now what happens when these escape routes seduces? These escape routes basically seduces those people who are stuck, those marginalized, racially dehumanized people who are stuck to pass through those escape routes. Now, once they try to pass through those escape routes, they are immediately trapped and suffocated. This is the problem, with metaphysical borders, those borders, and I use the term here metaphysical, not obviously in the spiritual sense. I use is that beyond physical borders, those invisible borders. And this element of metaphysical border is actually a kind of trap. And this is again another very famous Afro-American thinker, Lewis Gordon, identifies as dead freedom. He talks about two things. One is living freedom, one is dead freedom. Dead freedom is an illusion of the freedom where we think that we are free, but when we wish to freely express ourselves, when we freely wish to act and think and exchange, at that time, immediately, we are put into the scanner. And the third point is necropolitics. And what is this necropolitics all about? And I would like to, share this element of necropolitics. As I said it is from another very eminent thinker, Achille Mbembe. And he says that necropolitics defines as that is exit from democracy, where we create a social structure of enmity, where our voices of blood exist, terror and counter-terror as a times of medication and poison. These are some of the characteristic features of necropolitics. And how do we see that it is getting reflected? How it is getting reflected? We see that false videos are being made, Muslims spitting on the utensils. Someone is spitting on the fruit and selling it to the fruit sellers. And there are endless right now documents available on the internet. Through proper police investigation has been made, and it has been found that those are part of fake videos. So if COVID-19 is not opening up dimensions, so my question is obviously, how can we deny the fact that this pandemic of COVID-19 is not only a problem of a biomedical crisis, but with respect to this biomedical crisis, different other forms of racial, cultural, and communal divisions are coming to the forefront. And some of the examples I have shared, maybe if in case anybody wishes to ask questions or reflect or disagree, maybe I would like to share a few more points with that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. De. Hello.
Yes, madam.
Is the anchor intervening, or shall I start? Hello. Okay. So, good afternoon, all of you. Oh, yes, please do, please do.
उनका हो गया है.
Thank you, Dr. Sain Day, sir, for this wonderful thought-provoking session. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce the chairperson of this session, Dr. Asha Chaube, who is professor and head Department of English in Mahatma Jyotiba Phule, Rohilkhand University, Bareilly. She has total 20 years of experience. She is a recipient of many honors and awards. She is a founding member, International Women Review Board, UK. She has been awarded Indo-Hungarian EEP in 2010 by UGC New Delhi and HSB Budapest for research stay in 2010-11. She is a member of Professional Women's Advisory Board, American Biographical Institute. She is a recipient of Ivory Eagle Award, which was conferred by Home of Letters India. She is the founder general secretary of Gigi Visha, an association of women managers in higher education from UP, Bihar, and Uttarakhand. She has many publications to her credit and she has contributed in international publications as well. Works as a reviewer for post-colonial text and Rupakatha, a very prestigious peer-reviewed journal. She has completed her major research projects by UGC for women managers in higher education. I invite Dr. Asha Chaube, madam, for her person's remark. Over to you, madam.
Thank you. In the dark times, will there be singing? There will be singing of the dark times. And here we are singing of the dark times, and yet happy that singing, after all, goes on. A very good afternoon to all. A very warm welcome to all the distinguished guests and extremely valued participants. We are moving on to summarizing the second plenary session of our deliberation on borders, migration, and pandemic. From what I could read in the comment box, my job has become a little difficult. Nonetheless, I shall try to stick to the point as much as it would be possible. I mean, I'll try to stick to the academic part of it. You've heard Dr. Sayan Dey's powerful presentation on neo-racism and human crisis in times of COVID-19. It would be fitting to begin by congratulating Dr. Dey for choosing a topic so relevant to the times and so pertinent in its appeal. I was particularly intrigued by the title. In a LinkedIn post last month, our Honorable Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi, said that the coronavirus does not see a person's religion, race, color, caste, or creed for striking. To my mind, Dr. Dey takes this a bit further and talks about racism that we have voluntarily validated. He makes a case study of religious minorities, transgenders, and the Northeastern natives who are being increasingly discriminated against. Now, neo-racism is an abnormal that our misplaced perception has come to normalize. Dr. Dey spoke of the epistemic resystematization of racism in the times of Corona. Very well presented, Dr. Dey. My congratulations again. Pandemics not only create borders, they also give impetus to a blame game. And in this game, it is always the economically, socially weaker section of the society that would be blamed. This class is generally supposed to be immune to all diseases. And ironically, in the face of a pandemic, it is this class only that would be held as the spreader of the contagion. Racism indeed puts humanity through humiliation, intimidation, trauma, violence. It clearly implies that bodies are different. Now, biological pandemics destroy, but they disappear. But social pandemics leave a scar that does not heal. The other day, I chanced upon an interesting research proposed by the Australian National University on the racial discrimination that has spiked in times of corona. The principal investigator, it is one Professor Plato, he makes a pithy remark, and I quote, "Coronavirus is enabling a prejudice pandemic. The racism it is enabling is life-threatening." Now, this phrase, prejudice pandemic, is something we need to ponder over. Now, the religious, cultural, or social boundaries, they divide communities. They induce fear between two cultures, where one naturally proclaims superiority over the other. It is important and imperative that we understand that COVID-19 is a human virus. It does not have an ethnicity of its own. And as such, it does not discriminate against an ethnic group or race. But the sad part is that rumors and fear, they spread much faster than facts. High time we understood that social diseases, once rampant, become uncontrollable, though one could contain biological diseases in some time. Let us wage war against the pandemic, not amongst ourselves. Now, before I request the organizers to allow me to wrap up the session, I would like to extend my thanks to them for giving me the opportunity to be able to hear some of the amazingly sensible minds in the fraternity. Thanks also to the participants for their interest in the deliberations and their rapt attention. Also for their interesting comments in the boxes. Now, shall I hand it over to the control room? Is the anchor there? Hello?
Thank you, madam, for your expert comments. Now I take this opportunity to express my sincere thanks to Dr. Sayan Day sir for sharing his insightful thoughts with us. Thank you, sir. I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Asha Chobe madam for chairing this session and expressed her opinions. Thank you, madam. Now we have come to an end of this plenary session.
A very good afternoon once again. We are in the last session of the webinar. It was indeed a feast to listen to the learned speakers and the comments by the chairperson. For the concluding session, we have with us Dr. Vandana Bhagdikar, Principal of Mahila Mahavidyalaya, Nagpur. Dr. Vandana Bhagdikar is presently working as Principal, Mahila Mahavidyalaya, Nagpur. She has a vast teaching experience of nearly 24 years to UG and PG students. She is the member of Board of Studies of Rashtrasanta Tukadoji Maharaj, Nagpur University. She is intensively engaged in research, which includes a UGC-sanctioned minor research project. She is also a research supervisor, and 2 students have been awarded PhD under her supervision. She has published 2 books and nearly 40 research papers in reputed international and national journals. She has attended and presented papers in international and national conferences and seminars too. She is a life member of a number of professional bodies. Her area of interest includes Indian fiction and women's studies. I request Dr. Bhagdikar to give the concluding remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Dabir. A very warm good afternoon to all. Honorable Dr. Neeraj Khatti, Officiating Registrar, Rashtra Sant Tukadoji Maharaj, Nagpur University, Nagpur. Honorable Resource Person, Dr. Gamini Fonseca, Dr. Prantik Banerjee, Dr. Sayan Day, Chairpersons of Plenary Sessions, Management Committee members of 2 organizing colleges, conveners of this webinar, Dr. Urmila Dabir, Dr. Praveen Joshi, and all digital participants. First of all, I would like to congratulate the organizers for organizing this webinar on the burning issue, borders, migration, and pandemic, and also would like to thank them for giving me this opportunity to put forth my concluding remarks on this occasion. We have seen that in a matter of weeks, the COVID-19 pandemic has become the most important crisis that we are facing since World War II. Extraordinary measures have been taken and lives have changed overnight. The magnitude of the crisis is likely to have reshuffled the cards in several areas. The pandemic has resulted in tremendous efforts to enforce border control and huge restrictions to mobility. In the last few weeks, borders have been presented as safety barriers. The current pandemic, however, shows that they are not. Indeed, the virus does not stop on the border. It has no passport. As countries turn inward, this does not mean that world is safer. In the long run, borders are not meant to be hermetically closed. No moving, no help, no growing. Borders will continue to be challenged. The history has repeated itself after almost a century. Destructive events or phenomena like war, famine, disease, etc. have transformed many people into migrants across the world. The refugees have become the faces of the stories of violence and catastrophes. Except that it all seemed very far away with little risk of affecting us personally. With the COVID-19 pandemic, the crisis is in our house. This pandemic is a strong reminder of human beings' vulnerability. We can imagine 2 different stories about migration and the pandemic. The first is negative and pessimistic. In that scenario, the pandemic fuels fear, racism, and exclusion of the most vulnerable. The second is positive and optimistic. Here, the pandemic reminds everyone of their own vulnerability and reveals how much societies actually rely on migrants. The second is the positive side of the story. It is said that literature is a reflection of life. Literature provides us deepest and insightful record of events during pandemics and tries to provide consolation in times of need. Pandemics are mass murderers. Diseases like plague, smallpox, influenza, cholera, and now COVID-19 ruin families, destroy towns, and leave generations scarred and scared. Devastation caused by outbreak impacted many major writers across India and world over. Rabindranath Tagore, Premchand, Suryakant Tripathi Nirala, Fakir Mohan Senapati, T.S. Pillai, Albert Camus, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and others, giving birth to haunting poems, short stories, and novels. Literature regards each individual with compassion and goes deeper than what statistics or historical records can tell us. Literature may not explain away or fight off things such as pandemics, even as modern science sometimes can't. But it does become a source of consolation, a way of sharing our common humanist concerns, and its own way provides the deepest and most insightful record of the events. The speakers of today's webinar have very convincingly presented their views on the topic. Dr. Gamini Fonseca, the keynote speaker, has rendered a very well-researched and scholarly keynote address, tracing the 150 years of journey of migration, citing examples from literature. Dr. Prantik Banerjee, in a scholarly presentation in the first plenary session, has talked at length on the reflections of present crisis on popular culture. He delved in details with pandemic narrative and applied it to films and fiction, making the topic more interesting and opening the new avenues for future researchers. The resource person for second plenary session, Dr. Sayan Day, gave new perspective to the topic of neo-racism. He presented his views about how consistent efforts are being made to reorient racism in present times. He cited examples from articles and shared experiences by people to support his opinions. In the end, I would like to conclude with a hope that this is a temporary phase which will pass on soon. As the famous poet Shelley has rightly said in his famous poem, Ode to the West Wind, that if winter comes, can spring be far behind? Thank you. Stay safe, stay healthy.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vandana Bhagdekar. We have with us the officiating registrar of Nagpur University, Dr. Neeraj Khati, as chief guest for the valedictory function. I request Dr. Khati to say a few words on this occasion.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is my proud privilege to be present on the occasion of this webinar, which is arranged by jointly Sindhi Navayuk Mandal's Keval Ramani College and Prerna Seva Mandal. It is indeed nowadays in this pandemic situation, it's duty of all the stakeholders working in the educational sector to satisfy the needs of the student, and we have to look this as one of the wonderful opportunity to give education through information and communication technology. When we are working as a teacher, as a professor in the institute, we have to use the blackboard over there, and particularly the subjects which are of the literary nature, we are only using chalk and duster or chalk and blackboard over there. But when we are using ICT, we can show the various types of the presentation through the PowerPoints. We can have the video lectures. We can show the photographs over there. And by giving certain visuals, we can tell them the meanings which are involved in the literature over there. There are different types of the literature, particularly from the prose, poems. There are so many things over there. And when we are discussing all these things with the students, it is one of the best opportunity, and therefore this webinar is one of the platform over there where the teachers can learn the things in this COVID-19 type of the situation. Rashtra Sara's Nagpur University is always ahead in motivating and providing all necessary help for arranging such type of things. Dr. Urmila Dabiri, who is also one of the management council member and senate member over there, she has requested me and she has given me opportunity to interact with you. I this particular platform where we can utilize the platform which is given by the university for the students over there. There is a one platform which is called as the Upgrade, that is available on the Nagpur University website, which can be used for conducting such type of the webinars. Besides that, the Nagpur University in this COVID-19 type of the pandemic situation has done a lot of things for the students and also given opportunity to teachers through the video PowerPoint presentation. We have also arranged 2 or 3 types of the webinar. One is on the communication skill, one is general on the COVID-19 type of pandemic situation internationally, that is present over there. And we are also running so many types of social cost type of the arrangements, like the community kitchen is there. Then we are also providing kits to the students with the help of the all our administration under the able leadership of Dr. Murlidhar Chandekar, who is Vice Chancellor of our university, and our management council members, senate members also over there. We are also looking towards that how the online education can be carried out in future also. Yes, it is very true that we don't have that much type of the infrastructure available, but at the same time we have to see this as an opportunity and we have to develop such type of things. Yes, in the rural areas there are certain types of the difficulty, and which is not in our hand. The government has to look forward for how that can be provided, and that is also at a reduced cost. Now as compared to the international level, we are having very lesser cost as far as the data or the internet facilities are concerned. But even though it is very difficult for the rural peoples, the students, those who are living in the rural area, and the teachers, those who are living in the rural areas, there are connectivity problems over there. But yes, we have to overcome all about all these things over there, and we have to see this as a one of the opportunity. This is one of the best initiative that is taken by the UGC and also by the AICT, and as per the guidelines of the UGC and the AICT, the Nagpur University, whatever the guidelines which are received from the government of Maharashtra, has floated the idea to arrange such type of the online education courses over there. I am proud to say that near about 1100 videos, PowerPoint presentations that are available for the students on the different aspects. And I take this opportunity to announce and ask the teachers, fellow teachers, those who are participating in this webinar, to use this facility so that all the students of the Nagpur University that will be get benefited from your knowledge, your resources, and you will also be get benefited that such type of the videos, such type of the PowerPoint presentations which is related with our syllabus, we can give to our students, not only for the BA, BCom, BSc, but also for the postgraduate, which are the specialized one, and which is definitely enhancing our knowledge. The learning is continuous process over there, and therefore the teacher is always a learner, always a student, and therefore I request all the participants to participate in such type of the webinars, such type of the online education system over there, and develop different tools. And if you are having any suggestion, you can give such type of the constructive suggestion. The university administration under the leadership of Dr. Chandekar sir is always positive in such type of the initiatives. We will think over there and we can start different types of the initiatives over there. Dr. Urmila Dabir, other types of the management council members, they are supportive in that, and we are always looking ahead how we can motivate our students, we can satisfy the needs of our students. In examination system, we have implied various types of the modules over there, and now in the coming years we have to move from this traditional system to the online system somewhere, and we have to develop such type of the infrastructure. I am very much thankful to all the stakeholders over there, all the organizers over there, and particularly Dr. Urmila Dabir for giving me this opportunity to interact with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you much, sir, for your encouragement and motivation in organization of such events. I thank you very much, sir, for your presence and for your guidance. Thank you. Now I request Dr. Praveen Joshi to propose the formal vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, friends. This webinar is likely to come to its logical end. It has really given us a wonderful opportunity to deliberate on many issues which are social, political, cultural, even lingual. We find a kind of paradox. And what's that paradox? On one hand, WHO appeals to us that all humanity should come together, all nations should come together to fight this pandemic. Without the cooperation and coordination among different countries, it won't be possible for us to find out the solution to this large problem that has invaded our society, human society, and human minds. On one hand, we think of opening our emotional borders and let us show unity among all of us. On the other hand, we are closing the borders. On one hand, we see that appeal is made for us to come together, irrespective of our religions, caste, creed, communities, regionalism, and all other social barriers. And on the other hand, we see there are racial, cultural, even regional problems arising out of this COVID-19 and the fight with it. Therefore, I think this particular platform has given us a wonderful opportunity to see how through literature we can bring human society together, all human beings together. And since it is a duty, moral duty of literature to guide the society through our writings, through our poems, through our articles, through our write-ups, keep on emphasizing the need why we should come together and how we should fight this evil. I am really thankful to our keynote speaker, Professor Gamini, who did not take even a single minute to grant us his consent. He said, Dr. Joshi, I know very well that getting a speaker at such a short notice is really very difficult. So I won't disappoint you, and I will be there to deliver the keynote address. And sir, you have done it wonderfully. You have really laid the foundation for the discussions that have your keynote. It was a wonderful address and wonderful cooperation from you that we take in the form of blessings from you, since you are the senior most among us. Sir, I am really thankful to you and shall always be looking forward to listen to you again and again in future also. I am thankful to Dr. Sayan Day, our important resource person. He has taken the topic from chronology to chronology. That was really very interesting. He has given the sequence of how things have happened, how things have taken place, and to what extent they will go. And he has also dwelt on how we can fight it. I am really thankful to him. He has also received my call and immediately he agreed to be with us. Sir, I am really thankful to you. Prantik Banerjee, in fact, cannot be treated as a guest. He is our own. He is basically a kind of host, but still, I am thankful to him that he has highlighted all the aspects that are involved in COVID-19 and the consequences. Prantik, I feel deeply obliged to you. I'm thankful to my friends Dr. Sushil Sharma, Dr. Niru Tandon, and Dr. Asha Chaube, who really agreed to oblige me. And they have presented a wonderful analysis as the chairpersons of different sessions. Dr. Sushil Kumar Sharma, Dr. Niru Tandon, and Dr. Asha Chaube, I am really thankful to you and I owe a lot to you. I am also thankful to Dr. Vanna Bhagdikar, who presented a summing up here, and wonderfully she has done the job. I am also thankful to the Honorable Registrar of Nagpur City, Dr. Neeraj Khati, who has given a broad outline as to how in these days, in the presence of COVID-19, we can use technology to impart education to our students and how we can make it easier for students to learn when we cannot go in for traditional method of teaching in colleges and schools. Dr. Neeraj Khati, we are thankful to you. The entire team thanks you a lot for being with us and for having addressed us in the valedictory function. I am thankful to both the managements, Dr. S.C. Gullane, the Secretary of Prerna Seva Mandal, and Dr. Vijay Kumar Keval Ramani, President, Sindhi Navayuk Mandal, who have allowed us to have this webinar through our colleges. We have jointly organized many events, and in future also we shall be doing so. So once again, I express my thankfulness to both the managements. I am thankful to our entire technical team, Dr. Das, Dr. Revatkar, Dr. Sudhir Agarmore, and our assistants, Samir and Mohit, who have been ceaselessly working for the last 3 days to make this event a grand success. And they have done it. Hats off to them and to their efforts. I'm thankful to Dr. Madhuri Moril, Dr. Sucheta, Dr. Kanchan, and all others who have directly or indirectly contributed to the grand success of this event. So thanking once again all of you, I put an end to this session and declare that our webinar is over. Thank you very much.